Hello there. You've arrived just in time to the teddy bear picnic. We're about to read a story together, so please, take a seat. The grass is so delightfully warm today, and the breeze gently rustles your hair. It really is the perfect weather for a nice, long story, isn't it? So take a deep breath in and out, and listen closely as I read to you Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Chapter 1. Alice was beginning to get very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank and having nothing to do. Once or twice she had peeked into the book her sister was reading, but it had no pictures or conversations in it. And what is the use of a book, thought Alice, without pictures or conversations? So she was considering in her own mind, as well as she could, for the hot day made her feel very sleepy and stupid, whether the pleasure of making a daisy chain would be worth the trouble of getting up and picking the daisies, when suddenly a white rabbit with pink eyes ran close by her. There was nothing so very remarkable in that, nor did Alice think it so very much out of the way to hear the rabbit say to itself, oh dear, I shall be too late." When she thought it over afterwards, it occurred to her that she ought to have wondered at this, but at the time it all seemed quite natural. But when the rabbit actually took a watch out of its waistcoat pocket and looked at it and then hurried on, Alice started to feel her feet, for it flashed across her mind that she had never before seen a rabbit with either a waistcoat pocket or a watch to take out of it, and burning with curiosity, she ran across the field after it, and was just in time to see it pop down a large rabbit hole under the hedge. In another moment, down went Alice after it, never once considering how in the world she was to get out again. The rabbit hole went straight on like a tunnel for some way, and then dipped suddenly down, so suddenly that Alice had not a moment to think about stopping herself before she found herself falling down what seemed to be a very deep well. Either the well was very deep, or she fell very slowly, for she had plenty of time as she went down to look about her, and to wonder what was going to happen next. First she tried to look down and make out what she was coming to, but it was too dark to see anything. Then she looked at the sides of the well, and noticed they were filled with cupboards and bookshelves. Here and there she saw maps and pictures hung upon pegs. She took down a jar from one of the shelves as she passed. It was labeled Orange Marmalade, but to her disappointment it was empty. On this page there's an illustration of the rabbit running into the rabbit hole. But to her disappointment it was empty. She did not like to drop the jar for fear of killing somebody underneath, so managed to pull it into one of the cupboards as she fell past it. Well, Alice thought to herself, after such a fall as this, I shall think nothing of tumbling downstairs. How brave they'll all think me at home. Why, I wouldn't say anything about it, even if I fell off the top of the house, which was very likely true. Down, 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 would the fall never come to an end. I wonder how many miles I must have fallen by this time, she said aloud. I must be getting somewhere near the center of the earth. Let me see, that would be 4,000 miles down, I think. For you see, Alice had learned several things of this sort in her lessons in the schoolroom, and thought it was not a very good opportunity for showing off her knowledge, as there was no one to listen to her. Still, it was good practice to say it over. Yes, that's about the right distance, but I wonder what latitude or longitude I've got to. Alice had no idea what latitude was, or longitude either, but thought they were nice grand words to say. shall have to ask them what the name of the country is, you know. Please, ma'am, is this New Zealand or Australia? And she tried to curtsy as she spoke. Fancy curtsying as you're falling through the air. Do you think you could manage it? And what an ignorant little girl she'll think me. No, it'll never do to ask. Perhaps I shall see it written up somewhere. Down, down, down. There was nothing else to do. So soon Alice began talking again. Dina will miss me very much tonight, I should think. Dina was the cat. I hope they'll remember her saucer of milk at tea time. Dina, my dear, I wish you were down here with me. There are no mice in the air, I'm afraid, but you might catch a bat, and that's very like a mouse, you know. But do cats eat bats, I wonder? And here Alice began to get rather sleepy, went on saying things to herself in a dreamy sort of way. Do cats eat bats? Do cats eat bats? And sometimes, do bats eat cats? For you see, as she couldn't answer either question, it didn't much matter which way she put it. She felt that she was dozing off, and had just begun to dream that she was walking hand in hand with Dinah, and saying to her very earnestly, Now, Dinah, tell me the truth. Did you ever eat a bat? When suddenly, thump, 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 down she came upon a heap of sticks and dry leaves, and the fall was over. Alice was not a bit hurt, and she jumped up on her feet in a moment. She looked up, but it was all dark overhead. Before her was just another long passage, and the white rabbit was still in sight, hurrying down it. There was not a moment to be lost. Away went Alice like the wind, and was just in time to hear it say, as it turned the corner, Oh, my ears and whiskers, how late it's getting. She was close behind when she turned the corner, but the rabbit was no longer to be seen. She found herself in a long, low hall, which was lit up by a row of lamps hanging from the roof. There were doors all around the hall, but they were all locked. When Alice had been all the way down to one side and up the other, trying every other door, she walked sadly down the middle, wondering how she was ever to get out again. Suddenly she came upon a little three-legged table, all made of solid glass. There was nothing on it but a tiny golden key, and Alice's first idea was this might belong to one of the doors of the hall. But alas, either locks were too large or the key was too small, but at any rate it would not open any of them. However, upon the second time round, she came upon a low curtain she had not noticed before, and behind it was a little door about 15 inches high. She tried the little golden key in the lock, and to her great delight it fitted. Alice opened the door and found that it led to a small passage, not much larger than a rat hole. She knelt down and looked along the passage into the loveliest garden you ever saw. How she longed to get out of that dark hall and wander among those beds of bright flowers and cool fountains. But she could not even get her head through the doorway, and even if my head would go through, thought poor Alice, it would be very little use without my shoulders. Oh, how I wish I could shut up like a telescope. I think I could, if only I knew how to begin. For you see, so many out-of-the-way things had happened lately that Alice had begun to think very few things were indeed really impossible. There seemed to be no use in waiting by the little door, so she went back to the table, half hoping she might find another key on it, or at any rate a book of rules for shutting people up like telescopes. This time she found a little bottle. On it, which certainly was not here before, said Alice, and tied round the neck of the bottle was a paper label with the words, Drink Me, beautifully printed on in large letters. It was all very well to say drink me, but the wise little Alice was not going to do that in a hurry. No, I'll look first, she said, and whether it's marked poison or not. For she had read several nice little stories about children who'd got burnt and eaten up by wild beasts and other unpleasant things, all because they would not remember such simple rules their friends had taught them, such usually bleeds, and she had never forgotten that if you drink from a bottle marked poison, it is almost certain to disagree with you, sooner or later. However, this bottle was not marked poison, so Alice ventured to taste it, and finding it very nice. It had, in fact, a mixed flavor of cherry tart, custard, pineapple, roast turkey, coffee, and hot buttered toast. She very soon finished it off. What a curious feeling, said Alice. I must be shutting up like a telescope. And so it was indeed. She was now only 10 inches high, and her face brightened at the thought she was now the right size for going through that little door into that lovely garden. First, however, she waited for a few minutes to see if she was going to shrink any further. She felt a little nervous about this, for it might end, said Alice to herself, in my going out altogether, like a candle. I wonder what I would be like then. And she tried to fancy what the flame of a candle looks like after the candle is blown out, for she could not remember ever having seen such a thing. After a while, finding that nothing more happened, she decided on going into the garden at once. But alas for poor Alice. When she got to the door, she found she'd forgotten the little golden key. And when she went back to the table for it, she could not possibly reach it. She could see it quite plainly through the grass. And she tried her best to climb up one of the legs of the table, but it was too slippery. And when she had tired herself out with trying, the poor little thing sat down and cried. Come, there's no use crying to yourself like that, said Alice to herself rather sharply. I advise you to leave off this very minute. She generally gave herself very good advice, although she seldom followed it. And sometimes she scolded herself so severely as to bring tears into her eyes. And once she remembered trying to box her own ears for having cheated herself in a game of croquet she was playing against herself, for this curious child was very fond of pretending to be two people. But it's no use now, thought poor Alice, to pretend to be two people. Why, there's hardly enough of me left to make one respectable person. Soon her eye fell on a little glass box that was lying underneath the table. She opened it and found a very small cake on it, with the words, "Eat me," were beautifully marked in currants. Well, I'll eat it, said Alice, and if it makes me grow larger, I can reach the key, and if it makes me grow smaller, I can creep under the door, so either way I'll get into the garden, and I don't care which happens. She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, which way, holding her hand on the top of her head to feel which way it was going, and she was quite surprised she remained the same size. To be sure, this is what generally happens when one eats cake, but Alice had gotten so much into the way of expecting nothing but out-of-the-way things to happen that it seemed quite dull and stupid for life to go on the common way. So she set to work, and very soon finished off the cake. Chapter 2. Curiouser and curiouser, cried Alice. She was so much surprised that, for a moment, she quite forgot how to speak good English. Now I'm opening out like the largest telescope that ever was. Goodbye, feet. For when she looked down at her feet, they seemed to be almost out of sight. They were getting so far off. Oh, my poor little feet. I wonder who will put on your shoes and stockings for you now, dears. I'm sure I shan't be able. I shall be a great deal too far off in trouble myself to worry about you. You must manage the best way you can. But I must be kind to them, thought Alice, or perhaps they won't walk the way I want to go. Let me see, I'll give them a new pair of boots every Christmas. Then she went on planning to herself how she would manage it. They must go by the carrier, she thought, and how funny it'll seem sending presents to one's feet, and how odd the directions will look. Alice's right foot, her thrug, near the fender, with Alice's love. Oh dear, what nonsense I'm talking. Just then her head struck against the roof of the hall. In fact, she was now rather more than 9 feet high, and she at once took more hopeless than ever. She sat down and began to cry again. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself," said Alice. "A great girl like you," she might well say this, "to go on crying in this way. Stop this moment, I tell you." But she went on all the same, shedding gallons of tears until there was a large pool all around her, about 4 inches deep and reaching halfway down the hall. After a time, she heard a little pattering of feet in the distance, and she hastily dried her eyes to see what was coming. It was the White Rabbit, returning, splendidly dressed, with a pair of white gloves in one hand and a large fan in the other. He came trotting along in a great hurry, muttering to himself as he came, "Oh, the Duchess, the Duchess! Oh, won't she be savage if I've kept her waiting?" Alice felt so desperate that she was ready to ask help of anyone. So when the rabbit came near her, she began in a low, timid voice, "If you please, sir." The rabbit started violently, dropped the white kid gloves and the fan, and scurried away into the darkness as hard as he could go. Alice took up the gloves and fan, and as the hall was very hot, she kept fanning herself. All the time she went on talking. "Dear, dear, how queer everything is today. And yesterday things went on as usual. I wonder if I've been changed during the night. Let me think. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost think I can remember feeling a little different. But if I'm not the same, the next question is, who in the world am I? That's the great puzzle." And she began thinking over all the children she knew that were of the same age as herself, to see if any of them could have been changed. "I'm sure I am not Ada," she said, "for her hair goes in such long ringlets, and mine doesn't grow in ringlets at all. I'm sure it can't be Mabel, for I know all sorts of things, and she knows such very little. Besides, she's she, and I'm I. Oh dear, how puzzling it all is. I'll try if I know all the things I used to know. Let's see, 4 times 5 is 12, 4 times 6 is 13, 4 times 7 is... Oh dear, I shall never get to 20 at that rate. However, the multiplication table doesn't signify. Let's try geography. London is the capital of Paris, and Paris is the capital of Rome, and Rome... No, that's all wrong, I'm certain. I must have been changed for Mabel. I'll try to say, how doth the little... And she crossed her hands in her lap as if she were saying lessons, and began to repeat it, but her voice sounded hoarse and strange, and the words did not come to the same way they used to. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? How cheerfully he seems to grin, how neatly he spreads his claws and welcomes little fishes with gently smiling jaws. And I'm sure those are not the right words, said poor Alice. Her eyes filled with tears again as she went on. I must be Mabel after all, and I shall have to go and live in that poky little house, have next to no toys to play with, and oh, ever so many lessons to learn. No, I've made up my mind about it. If I'm Mabel, I'll stay down here. It'll be no use putting their heads down and saying, come up again, dear. I shall only look up and say, who am I then? Tell me that first, and if I like being that person, I'll come up. If not, I'll stay down here till I'm somebody else. But, oh dear, cried Alice, with a very sudden burst of tears. I do wish they would put their heads down. I'm so very tired of being all alone here. As she said this, she looked down at her hands and was surprised to see that she put on one of the little rabbit's little white kid gloves while she was talking. How can I have done that, she thought. I must be growing small again. She got up and went to the table to measure herself by it, and found, as nearly as she could guess, she was now about 2 feet high, and was going on shrinking rapidly. She soon found out that the cause of this was the fan she was holding, and dropped it hastily, just in time to avoid shrinking away altogether. That was a very narrow escape, said Alice, a good deal frightened at the sudden change, but very glad to find herself still in existence. And now for the garden. And she ran with all speed back to the little door, but alas, punished for it now, I suppose, by being drowned in my own tears. That will be a queer thing, to be sure. However, everything is queer today. Just then, she heard something splashing in the pool a little way off, and she swam near to make out what it was. At first, she thought it must be a walrus or a hippopotamus, but then she remembered how small she was now, and she soon made out that it was only a mouse that had slipped in like herself. Would it be of any use now, thought Alice, to speak to this mouse? Everything is so out of the way down here that I should think it very likely it can't talk. At any rate, there is no harm in trying. So she began. Oh, mouse, do you know the way out of this pool? I am very tired of swimming about here, oh mouse. Alice thought this might be the right way of speaking to a mouse. She had never done such a thing before, but she remembered having seen, in her brother's Latin grammar, a mouse, of a mouse, to a mouse, oh mouse. The mouse looked at her rather inquisitively, and seemed to wink at her with one of its little eyes, but it said nothing. Perhaps it doesn't understand English, thought Alice. I dare say it's a French mouse, come over with William the Conqueror. For all her knowledge of history, Alice had no very clear notion on how long ago anything had happened. So she began again. Oui, ist ma tete. I don't know French. Which was the first sentence in her French lesson book. The mouse gave a sudden leap out of the water and seemed to quiver all over with fright. Oh, I beg your pardon, Alice cried hastily, afraid she had hurt the poor animal's feelings. I quite forgot you didn't like cats. Not like cats, cried the mouse in a shrill, passionate voice. Would you like cats if you were me? Well, perhaps not, said Alice in a soothing tone. Don't be angry about it. I wish I could show you our cat, Dinah. I think you'd take a fancy to cats if you could only see her. She is such a dear, quiet thing. Alice went on, half to herself, as she swam lazily about in the pool. And she sits purring so nicely by the fire, licking her paws and washing her face. She is such a nice, soft thing to nurse, and she's such a capital for catching mice. Oh, I beg your pardon, cried Alice again, for this time the mouse was bristling all over, and she felt certain it must be really offended. We won't talk about her any more if you'd rather not. We indeed, cried the mouse, who was trembling down to the end of his tail. As if I would talk on about such a subject. Our family always hated cats. Nasty, low, vulgar things. Don't let me hear the name again. I won't indeed, said Alice, in a great hurry to change the subject of conversation. Are you fond of dogs? The mouse did not answer, so Alice went on easily. There is such a nice little dog near our house I should like to show you. A little bright-eyed terrier, you know, with, such long, curly brown hair, and it'll fetch things when you throw them, and it'll sit up and beg for its dinner, and all sorts of things. I can't remember half of them, and it belongs to a farmer, you know, and he says it's so useful. It's worth £100. He says it kills all the rats, and... Oh dear, cried Alice in a sorrowful tone. I'm sorry if I've offended again, for the mouse was swimming away from her as hard as it could go, and making quite a commotion in the pool as it went. So she called softly after it, Mouse dear, do come back again. We won't talk about cats or dogs either, if you don't like them. When the mouse heard this, it turned around and swam slowly back to her, its face quite pale with passion, Alice thought, and it said in a low, trembling voice, let us get to the shore, and then I'll tell you my history, and you'll understand why it is I hate cats and dogs. sort of circle. The exact shape doesn't matter, it said. And then all the party were placed along the course here and there. There was no 1, 2, 3, and away, but they began running when they liked, and left off when they like, so that it was not easy to know when the race was over. However, when they had been running for half an hour or so, and were quite dry again, the dodo suddenly called, "The race is over!" And they all crowded around it, panting, asking, "But who has won?" This question the dodo could not answer without a great deal of thought, and it stood up for a time with one finger pressed to its forehead, the position with which you usually see Shakespeare in the pictures of him, while the rest waited in silence. At last the dodo said, "Everybody has won, and all must have prizes." But who was to give the prizes? Asked a chorus of voices. "Why, she, of course," said the dodo, pointing to Alice with one finger, and the whole party at once crowded around her, calling out in a confused way, "Prizes, prizes!" Alice had no idea what to do, and in despair she put her hand in her pockets and pulled out a box of comfits. Luckily, the salt water had not gotten into it, and handed them around as prizes. There was exactly one apiece all around. "But she must have a prize herself, you know," said the mouse. "Of course," said the dodo very gravely. "What else have you got in your pocket?" It went on, turning to Alice. "Only a thimble," Alice said sadly. "Hand it over here," said the dodo. Then they all crowded around her once more, while the dodo solemnly presented a thimble, saying, "We beg your acceptance of this elegant thimble." And when it had finished this short speech, they all cheered. Alice thought the whole thing was very absurd, but they all looked so grave that she did not dare to laugh, and as she could not think of anything else to say, she simply bowed and took the thimble, looking as solemn as she could. The next thing was to eat the comfits. This caused some noise and confusion, as the large birds complained that they could not taste theirs, and only the small ones choked, and the small ones choked and had to be patted on the back. However, it was over at last, and they sat down again in a ring and begged the mouse to tell them something more. "You promised to tell me your history, you know," said Alice, "and why it is you hate C&D," she added in a whisper, half afraid it would be offended again. "Mine is a long and sad tale," said the mouse, turning to Alice and sighing. "It is a long tale, certainly," said Alice, looking down with wonder at the mouse's tail. "Why do you keep calling it sad?" And she went on puzzling about it while the mouse was speaking, so that her idea of the tale was something like this. It's hard to explain what the next page looks like, but the words wrap around in a spiral in the shape of a mouse's tail, reading, "Fury said to a mouse that he met in the house, 'Let us both go to law. I will prosecute you. Come, I'll take no denial. We must have the trial, for really this morning I've nothing to do.' Said the mouse to the cur, 'Such trial, dear sir, with no jury or judge, would be wasting our breath. I'll be the judge slowly back again, and looking anxiously about it as it went, as if it had lost something, and was muttering to itself, "The Duchess, oh, the Duchess, oh my dear paws, oh my fern whiskers, she'll get me executed as sure as ferrets are ferrets. Where can I have dropped them, I wonder?" Alice guessed in a moment that it was looking for the fan and the pair of white kid gloves, that she had very good-naturedly began hunting about for them, but they were nowhere to be seen. Everything seemed to have changed since her swim in the pool, and the great hall with the glass table and little door had vanished completely. Soon the rabbit noticed Alice, and as she went hunting about, and called out to her in an angry tone, "Why, Marianne, what are you doing out here? Run home this moment and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan, quick now." And Alice was so much frightened that she ran off at once in the direction it had pointed to, without trying to explain the mistake it had made. "He took me for his housemaid," she said to herself as she ran. "How surprised he'll be when he finds out who I am. But I'd better take care of him. Better take him his fan and gloves, that is, if I can find them." As she said this, she came upon a neat little house, on the door of which was a bright brass plate with the name W. Rabbit engraved upon it. She went in without knocking and hurried up the stairs in a great fear lest she should meet the real Mary Ann and be turned out of the house before she had found the fan and gloves. "How queer it seems," said Alice to herself, "to be going messages for a rabbit. I suppose Dinah will be sending me on messages next." And she began fancying the sort of thing that would happen. "Miss Alice, come here directly and get ready for your walk. Coming in a minute, nurse." This next page has an illustration showing Alice's pool of tears and all the animals swimming behind her. The next glossy page, all the animals gathered around the dodo. On the bottom it reads, "They all crowded around it, panting and asking, 'But who has won?'" The next page is the white rabbit running up to Alice. It says, "Why, Marianne, what are you doing out here?" These illustrations are all in color and very lovely, but you can tell they've been worn a little bit with time. It's an old copy of the book. The last one comes later in the story. It says, "Advice from a caterpillar." There's a little caterpillar on top of a mushroom with a hookah, and Alice looks up at him with a gentle expression. "But I've got to watch this mouse hill till Dinah comes back, and see that the mouse doesn't want to get out." Only I don't think," Alice went on, "that they'd let Dinah stop in the house if it had begun ordering people around like that." By this time she found her way into a tidy little room with a table in the window, and on it, as she had hoped, a fan and 2 or 3 pairs of tiny white kid gloves. She took up the fan and a pair of the gloves, and was just going to leave the room when her eye fell upon a little bottle that stood near the looking-glass. There was no label this time with the words "Drink me," but nevertheless she uncorked it and put it to her lips. "I know something interesting is sure to happen," she said to herself, "whenever I eat or drink anything. So I'll see what this bottle does. I do hope it will make me grow large again, for I really am quite tired of being such a tiny little thing." It did so indeed, and much sooner than she had expected. She drank half the bottle and found her head pressing against the ceiling, and had to stoop to save her neck from being broken. She hastily put down the bottle, saying to herself, "That's quite enough. I hope I shan't grow any more. As it is, I can't quite get out the door, so I wish I hadn't drunk it so much." Alas, it was too late to wish that. She went on growing and growing, and very soon had to kneel down on the floor. In another minute there was not even room for this, and she tried the effect of lying down, with one elbow against the door, and the other arm curled around her head. Still, she went on growing, and as a last resource she put one arm out the window, and one foot up the chimney, and said to herself, "Now I can do no more. Whatever happens, what will become of me?" Luckily for Alice, the little magic bottle had now had its full effect, and she grew no larger. It was very uncomfortable, and as there seemed to be no sort of chance of her ever getting out of the room again, no wonder she felt unhappy. It was much wasn't her at home, thought poor Alice, when one wasn't always growing larger and smaller and being ordered around by mice and rabbits. I almost wish I hadn't gone down that rabbit hole. And yet, it's rather curious, this sort of life. I do wonder what can have happened to me. When I used to read fairy tales, I fancied that kind of thing never happened, and now here I am in the middle of one. There ought to be a book written about me. That there ought. And when I grow up, I'll write one. But I'm grown up now, she added with a sorrowful tone. At least there's no room to grow up any more here. But then, thought Alice, I shall never get any older than I am now. That'll be a comfort to never be an old woman. But then, always have lessons to learn. Oh, I shouldn't like that. Oh, you foolish Alice, she answered herself. How can you learn lessons in here? Why, there's hardly room for you. No room at all for any lesson books. And so she went on, taking first one side and then the other, making quite a conversation of it all together. But after a few minutes she heard a voice outside and stopped to listen. Marianne, Marianne, said the voice. Fetch me my gloves this moment. Then came a little pattering of feet on the stairs. Alice knew it was the rabbit coming to look for her, and she trembled till she shook the house, quite forgetting that she was now 1,000 times as large as the rabbit and had no reason to be afraid of it. Presently the rabbit came up to the door and tried to open it, but as the door pressed inwards and Alice's elbow was shoved hard against it, that attempt proved a failure. Alice heard it say to itself, "Then I'll go round and get in at the window." That you will, thought Alice, and after waiting till she fancied she heard the rabbit just under the window, she suddenly spread out her hand and made a snatch in the air. She did not get a hold of anything, but she heard a little shriek and a fall, and a crash of broken glass, from which she concluded that it was just possible it had fallen into a cucumber frame, or something of the sort. Next came an angry voice, the rabbit's. "Pat, Pat, where are you?" And then a voice she had never heard before. "Sure then, I'm here, digging for apples, Your Honor." "Digging for apples indeed," the rabbit said angrily. "Here, come and help me out of this." Sounds of more broken glass. "Now tell me, Pat, what's that in the window?" "Sure, it's an arm, Your Honor." You pronounce it arm. "An arm, you goose. Who ever saw one that size? Why, it fills the whole window." "Sure does, Your Honor, but it's an arm." For all that. "Well, it's got no business there, at any rate. Go and take it away." There was a long silence after this, and Alice could only hear whispers now and again, such as, "Sure, I don't like it, Your Honor, at all." "Do as I tell you, you coward." And at last she spread out her hand again, and made another snatch in the air. This time there were 2 little shrieks, and more sounds of broken glass. What a number of cucumber frames there must be, thought Alice. I wonder what they'll do next. As for pulling me out the window, I only wish they could. I'm sure I don't want to stay in here any longer. She waited for some time without hearing anything more. At last came a rumbling of little cartwheels, and the sound of a good many voices, all talking together. She made out the words, "Where's the other ladder? Why, I hadn't thought to bring but one. Bill's got the other. Bill, fetch it here, lad. Here, put 'em up at this corner. No, tie 'em together first. They don't reach half high enough yet. Oh, they'll do well enough. Don't be particular. Here, Bill, catch hold of this rope. Will the roof bear? Mind that loose slate. Oh, it's coming down. Heads below." A loud crash. Now who did that? It was Bill, I fancy. "Who's to go down the chimney? Nay, I shan't. You do it. That I won't, then. Bill's to go down. Here, Bill, the master says you've got to go down the chimney." "Oh, so Bill's got to come down the chimney, has he?" said Alice to herself. "Why, they seem to put everything upon Bill. I wouldn't be in Bill's place for a good deal. This fireplace is narrow, to be sure, but I think I can kick a little." She drew her foot as far down the chimney as she could, and waited till she heard a little animal, she couldn't guess what sort it was, scratching and scrambling about in the chimney close above her. Then, saying to herself, "This is Bill," she gave one sharp kick, and waited to see what would happen next. The first thing she heard was the general chorus of "There goes Bill," and the rabbit's voice alone. "Catch him, you by the hedge." Then silence. Then another confusion of voices. "Hold up his head, brandy now. Don't choke him. How is it? And old fellow, what happened to you? Tell us all about it." At last came a feeble, squeaking voice. "That's Bill, hands instantly, and Alice thought to herself, I wonder what they will do next. If they had any sense, they'd take the roof off. After a minute or two, they began moving about again. Alice heard the rabbit say, a barrowful would do. To begin with, a barrowful of what, thought Alice. But she had not long to doubt, for the next moment a shower of little pebbles came rattling in the window, and some of them hit her in the face. I'll put a stop to this, she said to herself, and shouted, You better not do that again, which produced another dead silence. Alice noticed with some surprise that the pebbles were all turning into little cakes and lay on the floor, and the bright idea came into her head. If I eat one of these cakes, it's sure to make some change in my size, and as it can't possibly make me larger, I'm sure it must make me smaller, I suppose. So she swallowed one of the cakes, and was delighted to find that she began shrinking directly. As soon as she was small enough to get out the door, she ran out the house, found quite a crowd of little animals and birds waiting outside. The poor little lizard, Bill, was in the middle of being held up by 2 guinea pigs, who were giving it something out of a bottle. They all made a rush at Alice the moment she appeared, but she ran off as hard as she could, and soon found herself safe in a thick wood. The first thing I've got to do, said Alice to herself, as she wandered about the wood, is to grow to my right size again. The second thing to do is find my way into that lovely garden. I think that will be the best plan. It sounded like an excellent plan, no doubt, and very neatly and simply arranged. The only difficulty was that she had not the smallest idea how to set about it. And while she was peering anxiously among the trees, a little sharp bark just over her head made her look up in a great hurry. An enormous puppy was looking down at her with large round eyes, and feebly stretching out one paw trying to touch her. Poor little thing, said Alice in a coaxing tone. She tried hard to whistle to it, but she was terribly frightened all the time. She thought it might be hungry, in which case it would be very likely to eat her up in spite of all her coaxing. Hardly knowing what she did, she picked up a bit of a stick, held it out to the puppy, whereupon the puppy jumped into the air, off all its feet at once with a yelp of delight, and rushed at the stick, and made believe to worry it. Then Alice dodged behind a great thistle to keep herself from being run over, and the moment she appeared on the other side, the puppy made another rush at the stick, and tumbled head over heels in a hurry to get a hold of it. Then Alice, thinking it was very likely having a game of play with a cart horse, and expecting every moment to be trampled under its feet, ran around the thistle again. Then the puppy began a series of short charges at the stick, running a little way forward each time, a long way back, and barking hoarsely all the while, till at last it sat down a good way off, panting, with its tongue hanging out its mouth and its eyes half shut. This seemed to Alice a good opportunity for making her escape, so she set off at once and ran till she was quite tired and out of breath. Still the puppy's bark sounded quite faint in the distance. And yet, what a dear little puppy it was, said Alice. She leaned against a buttercup to herself, and fanned herself with one of the leaves. I should have liked teaching it tricks very much, if only I'd been the right size to do it. Oh dear, I nearly forgotten that I've got to grow up again. Let me see, how is it to be managed? I suppose I ought to drink something or the other, but a great question is what? The great question certainly was what? Alice looked all around her at the flowers and blades of grass, but she could not see anything that looked like it was the right thing to eat or drink under the circumstances. There was a large mushroom growing near her, about the same height as herself, when she had looked under it, and on both sides it and behind it, it occurred to her that she might as well look and see what was on top of it. She stretched herself up on tiptoe and peeped over the edge of the mushroom, and her eyes immediately met those of a large blue caterpillar that was sitting on top of the mushroom with its arms folded, quietly smoking a long hookah and taking not the smallest notice of her or anything else. Chapter 5. The caterpillar and Alice looked at each other for some time in silence. At last the caterpillar took the hookah out of its mouth, and addressed her in a languid, sleepy voice. "Who are you?" said the caterpillar. This was not an encouraging opening for a conversation. Alice replied rather shyly, "I hardly know, sir. Just at present "Is that all?" said Alice, swallowing down her anger as well as she could. "No," said the caterpillar. Alice thought she might do well wait, as she had nothing else to do, and perhaps, after all, it might tell her something worth hearing. For some minutes it puffed away without speaking, but at last it unfolded its arms, took the hookah out of its mouth again, and said, "So you think you're changed, do you?" "I'm afraid I am, sir," said Alice. "I can't remember things as I used, and I don't keep the same size for 10 minutes together." "Can't remember what things?" said the caterpillar. "Well, I've been tried to say, 'How doth the little busy bee,' but it came out all different," Alice replied in a very melancholy voice. "Repeat, 'You are old, Father William,'" said the caterpillar. Alice folded her hands and began. "You are old, Father William," the young man said, "and your hair has become very white, yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think at your age it is right?" "In my youth," Father William replied to his son, "I feared it might injure the brain, but now I'm perfectly sure I have none, why I do it again and again." "You are old," said the youth, "as I mentioned before, and have grown most uncommonly fat, yet you turned a back somersault in the door. Pray, what is the reason of that?" "In my youth," said the sage as he shook his grey locks, "I kept all my limbs very supple. By the use of this ointment, when shilling the box, allow me to sell you a couple." "You are old," said the youth, "and your jaws too weak for anything tougher than soot. Yet you finished the goose with the bones in the beak. Pray, how did you manage to do it?" "In my youth," said his father, "I took to the law and argued each case with my wife, and the muscular strength which it gave my jaw, it lasted the rest of my life." "You are old," said the youth. "One would hardly suppose that your eye was steady as ever, yet you balanced an eel on the end of your nose. What made you so awfully clever?" "I have answered 3 questions, and that is enough," said his father. "Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen all day to such stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs." "That is not said right," said the caterpillar. "Not quite right, I'm afraid," said Alice, timidly. "Some of the words have got altered." "It is wrong from beginning to end," said the caterpillar, decidedly, and there was silence for some minutes. The caterpillar was the first to speak. "What size do you want to be?" it asked. "Oh, I'm not particular as to size," Alice hastily replied. "Only one doesn't like changing so often, you know." "I don't know," said the caterpillar. Alice said nothing. She had never been so much contradicted in all her life before. She felt she was losing her temper. "Are you content now?" said the caterpillar. "Well, I should like to be a little larger, sir, if you wouldn't mind," said Alice. 3 inches is such a wretched height to be." "It is a very good height indeed," said the caterpillar angrily, rearing itself upright. But as it spoke, it was exactly 3 inches high. "But I'm not used to it," pleaded poor Alice in a piteous tone, and she thought to herself, "I wish creatures wouldn't be so easily offended." "You'll get used to it in time," said the caterpillar. It put its hookah into its mouth and began smoking again. This time Alice waited patiently until it chose to speak again. In a minute or 2 the caterpillar took the hookah out of its mouth and yawned once or twice and shook itself. Then it got down off the mushroom and crawled away into the grass, merely remarking as it went, "One side will make you grow taller, the other side will make you grow smaller." "One side of what? The other side of what?" Alice thought to herself. "Of the mushroom," said the caterpillar, just as if she had asked it aloud, and in another moment he was out of sight. Alice remained looking thoughtfully at the mushroom for a minute, trying to make out which were the 2 sides of it, and as it was perfectly round, she found this a very difficult question. However, at last she stretched her arms around it as far as they would go and broke off a bit of the edge with each hand. "Now which is which?" she said to herself, and nibbled a little bit of the right hand to try the effect. The next moment she felt a violent blow underneath her chin. It had struck her foot. She was a good deal frightened by this very sudden change, but she felt that there was no time to be lost, as she was shrinking rapidly. So she set to work to eat some of the other bit. Her chin was pressed so tightly closely against her foot that there was hardly room to open her mouth, but she did at last, and managed to swallow a morsel of the left-handed bit. "Come, my head's free at last," said Alice in a tone of
use in saying anything more till the pigeon had finished. As if it wasn't enough trouble hatching the eggs, said the pigeon, I must be on the lookout for serpents night and day. Why, I haven't a wink of sleep these 3 weeks. I'm very sorry you've been annoyed, said Alice, who was beginning to see its meaning. There's a little illustration of Alice's large neck peeking below the trees and the bird attacking her. Her hair is all curly and in a bunch of weird twisted ways, so it's been falling through the branches. And I'd just taken the highest tree in the wood, continued the pigeon, raising its voice to a shriek. And just as I was thinking I should be free of them at last, they must needs come wriggling down from the sky. Ugh, serpent! But I'm not a serpent, I tell you, said Alice. Well, what are you? Said the pigeon. I can see you're trying to invent something. I'm a little girl, said Alice, rather doubtfully, as she remembered the number of changes she had gone throughout the day. A likely story indeed, said the pigeon in a tone of deepest contempt. I've seen a good many little girls in my time, but never one with such a neck as that. No, you're a serpent, and there's no use denying it. I suppose you'll be telling me that next you've never tasted an egg. I have tasted eggs, certainly, said Alice, who was a very truthful little child. But little girls eat eggs quite as much as serpents do, you know. I don't believe it, the pigeon said. But if they do, why then they're a kind of serpent. That's all I can say. This was such a new idea to Alice that she was quite silent for a moment or two, which gave the pigeon an opportunity of adding, You're looking for eggs. I know that well enough. And what does it matter to me whether you're a little girl or a serpent? It matters a good deal to me, said Alice hastily, but I'm not looking for eggs as it happens, and if I was, I wouldn't want yours. I don't like them raw. Well, be off then, said the pigeon in a sulky tone, as it settled down again into its nest. Alice crouched down among the trees as well as she could, for her neck kept getting entangled among the branches, and every now and then she had to stop and untwist it. After a while she remembered that she still held the pieces of mushrooms in her hands, and she set to work nibbling very carefully. At first at one end, then at the other, growing sometimes taller, sometimes shorter, until she succeeded in bringing herself down to her usual height. It was so long since she had been anything near the right size that it felt quite strange at first, but she got used to it in a few minutes and began talking to herself as usual. Come, there's half my plan now. How puzzling all these changes are. I'm never sure what I'm going to be from one minute to another. However, I've got back to my right size. The next thing is to get into that beautiful garden. How is that to be done, I wonder? As she said this, she came suddenly upon an open place with a little house in it about 4 feet high. Whoever lives there, thought Alice, it'll never do to come upon them this size. Why, I should frighten them out of their wits. So she began nibbling at the right-hand bit again, but did not venture to go near the house till she had brought herself down to 9 inches high.
Chapter 6. For a minute or two she stood looking at the house and wondering what to do next, when suddenly a footman in livery came running out of the wood. She considered him to be a footman because he was in livery, otherwise, judging by his face only, she would have called him a fish, and rapped loudly at the door with his knuckles. It was opened by another footman in livery, with a round face and large eyes like a frog, and both footmen, Alice noticed, had powdered hair that curled all over their heads. She felt very curious to know what it was all about, and crept a little way out of the wood to listen. The fish footman began by producing from under his arm a great letter nearly as large as himself, and this he handed over to the other, saying in a solemn tone, For the Duchess, an invitation from the Queen to play croquet. The frog footman repeated in the same solemn tone, only changing the order of the words a little. From the Queen, an invitation for the Duchess to play croquet. And they both bowed low, and their curls got entangled together. Alice laughed so much at this that she had to run back into the wood for fear of their hearing her, and when she next peeped out, the fish footman was gone, and the other was sitting on the ground near the door, staring stupidly up into the sky. Alice went timidly up to the door and knocked. There's no use knocking, said the footman, and that's for 2 reasons. First, because I'm on the same side of the door as you are, and secondly, because they're making such a noise inside, no one could possibly hear you.
and certainly there was a most extraordinary noise going on within. Constant howling and sneezing, and every now and again a great crash as if a dish or a kettle had been broken to pieces.
Please then, said Alice, how am I to get in? There might be some sense in your knocking, the footman went on without attending to her. If we have the door between us, for instance, if you were inside, you might knock, and I could let you out, you know. He was looking up at the sky all the time he was speaking, and Alice thought decidedly uncivil. But perhaps he can't help it, she said to herself. His eyes are so very nearly at the top of his head. But at any rate, he might answer questions. How am I to get in? She repeated aloud. I shall sit here, the footman remarked, till tomorrow. At this moment the door of the house opened, and a large plate came skimming out, straight at the footman's head, and just grazed his nose and broke to pieces against one of the trees behind him. Or the next day, maybe, the footman continued in the same tone, exactly as if nothing had happened. How am I to get in? Alice asked again in a louder tone. Are you to get in at all? Said the footman. That's the first question, you know. It was, no doubt. Only Alice did not like to be told so. It's really dreadful, she muttered. The way all the creatures argue, it's enough to drive one crazy. The footman seemed to consider this a good opportunity for repeating his remark with variations. I shall sit here, he said, on and off, for days and days. But what am I to do? Said Alice. Anything you like, said the footman, and began whistling. Oh, there's no use in talking to him, said Alice desperately. He's perfectly idiotic. And she opened the door and went in. The door led right into a large kitchen, which was full of smoke from one end to the other. The Duchess was sitting on a three-legged stool, and in the middle nursing a baby. The cook was leaning over the fire, stirring a large cauldron which seemed to be full of soup. There's certainly too much pepper in that soup, Alice said to herself, as well as she could for sneezing. There was certainly too much of it in the air. Even the Duchess sneezed occasionally, and the baby was sneezing and howling alternately, without a moment's pause. The only things in the kitchen that did not sneeze were the cook, a large cat which was sitting on the hearth and grinning from ear to ear. Would you please tell me, said Alice, a little timidly, for she was not quite sure whether it was good manners for her to speak first, why your cat grins like that? It's a Cheshire cat, said the Duchess, and that's why. Pig. She said the last word with such sudden violence that Alice quite jumped. But she saw in another moment that it was addressed to the baby and not to her, so she took the courage and went on again. I did not know that Cheshire cats always grinned.
reactions. Just like a starfish, thought Alice. The poor little thing was snorting like a steam engine when she caught it, and kept doubling itself up and straightening itself out again, so that altogether, for the first minute or two, it was as much as she could do just to hold it.
As soon as she made out the proper way of nursing it, which was to twist it up into a knot and then keep it tight hold of its right ear and left foot as to prevent it from undoing itself, she carried it out into the open air. If I don't take this child away with me, thought Alice, they're sure to kill it in a day or two. Wouldn't it be murder to leave it behind? She said the last words out loud, and the little thing grunted in reply. It had left off sneezing by this time. Don't grunt, said Alice. That's not a proper way of expressing yourself. The baby grunted again, and Alice looked very anxiously into its face to see what was the matter with it. There could be no doubt it had a very turned-up nose, much more like a snout than a real nose, and also his eyes were extremely small for a baby. Altogether, Alice did not like the look of the thing at all. But perhaps it was only sobbing, she thought, and looked into its eyes again to see if there were any tears. No, there were no tears. If you're going to turn into a pig, my dear, Alice said seriously, I'll have nothing more to do with you. Mind now. The poor little thing sobbed again, or grunted, which was impossible to say which, and they went on for some time, for some while in silence. Alice was just beginning to think to herself, now what am I to do with this creature when I get it home? When it grunted again, so violently that she looked down into its face with some alarm. This time there could be no mistake about it. It was neither more nor less than a pig, and she felt that it would be quite absurd for her to carry it any further. So she set the little creature down, and felt quite relieved to see it trot quietly away into the wood. If it had grown up, she said to herself, it would have made a dreadfully ugly child. But it makes a rather handsome pig, I think. And she began thinking over other children she knew, who might
March Hare will be the most interesting, and perhaps, as this May, it won't be raving mad. At least, not so mad as it was in March. As she said this, she looked up again, and there was the cat sitting on the branch of the tree. "Did you say pig or fig?" said the cat. "I said pig," replied Alice, "and I wish you wouldn't keep appearing and vanishing so suddenly. You make one quite giddy." "All right," said the cat, and this time it vanished quite slowly, beginning with the end of its tail and ending with the grin, which remained some time after the rest of it had gone. Well, I've often seen a cat without a grin, but a grin without a cat, that's the most curious thing I ever saw in all my life.
She had not gone much farther because she came in sight of the house of the March Hare. She thought it must be the right house because the chimneys were shaped like ears and the roof was thatched with fur. It was so large a house that she did not like to go nearer till she had nibbled some more of the left hand bit of the mushroom and raised herself about 2 feet high. Even then she walked up toward it rather timidly, saying to herself, "I suppose it should be raving mad after all. I almost wish I'd gone to see the Hatter instead." Chapter 7. There was a table set out under a tree in front of the house, and the March Hare and the Hatter were having tea at it. A dormouse was sitting between them, fast asleep, and the other two were using it as a cushion, resting their elbows on it and talking over its head. Very uncomfortable for the dormouse, thought Alice. Only as it's asleep, I suppose it doesn't mind. The table was a large one, but the three were all crowded together in one corner of it. "No room, no room," they cried out when they saw Alice coming. "There's plenty of room," Alice said indignantly, and she sat down in a large armchair at one end of the table. "Have some wine," the March Hare said in an encouraging tone. Alice looked all around the table, but there was nothing but tea. "I don't see any wine," she remarked. "There isn't any," said the March Hare. "Then it wasn't very civil of you to offer it," said Alice angrily. "Wasn't very civil of you to sit down without being invited," said the March Hare. "I didn't know it was your table. It's laid for a great many more than 3. "Your hair wants cutting," said the Hatter. He had been looking at Alice for some time with great curiosity, and this was his first speech. "You should learn not to make personal remarks," Alice said with some severity. "It's very rude." The Hatter opened his eyes wide upon hearing this, but all he said was, "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" "Come, we shall have some fun now," thought Alice. "I'm very glad they've begun talking in riddles. I believe I can guess that," she added aloud. "Do you think you can find out the answer to it?" said the March Hare. "Exactly so," said Alice. "Then you should say what you mean," the March Hare went on. "I do," Alice hastily replied. "At least, I mean what I say. That's the same thing, you know." "Not the same thing a bit," said the Hatter. "Why, you just might as well say that I see what I eat is the same thing as I eat what I see." "You might just well say," added the March Hare, "that I like what I get is the same thing as I get what I like." "You might just as well say," added the dormouse, which seemed to be talking in its sleep, "that I breathe when I sleep is the same thing as saying I sleep when I breathe." "But it is the same thing with you," said the Hatter, and here the conversation dropped, and the party sat in silence for a minute, while Alice thought over all she could remember about ravens and writing desks, which wasn't much. The Hatter was the first to break the silence. "What day of the month is it?" he said, turning to Alice. He had taken out his watch out of his pocket and was looking at it uneasily, shaking it every now and again and holding it to its ear. Alice considered a little and then said, "The 4th. 2 days wrong," sighed the Hatter. "I told you butter would not suit the works," he added, looking angrily at the March Hare. "It was the best butter," the March Hare meekly replied. "Yes, but some crumbs must have gotten in as well," the Hatter grumbled. "You shouldn't have put it in with the bread knife." The March Hare took the watch and looked at it gloomily, then dipped it into his cup of tea and looked at it again, but he could think nothing better to say than his first remark. "It was the best butter, you know." Alice had been looking over his shoulder with some curiosity. "What a funny watch," she remarked. "It tells the day of the month, but it doesn't tell what o'clock it is." "Why should it?" muttered the Hatter. "Does your watch tell you what the year is?" "Of course not," Alice replied very readily, "but that's because it stays the same year for such a long time together." "Which is just the case with mine," said felt dreadfully puzzled. The Hatter's remark seemed to have no meaning in it, and yet it was certainly English. I don't quite understand, she said, as politely as she could. The Dormouse is asleep again, said the Hatter, and he poured a little hot tea upon its nose. The Dormouse shook its head impatiently, and said without opening its eyes, of course, just what I was going to remark myself. Have you guessed the riddle yet? The Hatter said, turning to Alice again. No, I give up, Alice replied. What's the answer? I haven't the slightest idea, said the Hatter. Nor have I, said the March Hare. Alice sighed wearily. I think you might do something better with the time, she said, than wasting it asking riddles with no answers. If you knew time as well as I do, said the Hatter, you wouldn't be talking about wasting it. It's him. I don't know what you mean, said Alice. Of course you don't, the Hatter said, tossing his head contemptuously. I dare say you never spoke to time. Perhaps not, Alice cautiously replied. But I know I have to beat time when I learn music. Ah, that accounts for it, said the Hatter. He won't stand beating. Now, if you only kept on good terms with him, he'd do almost anything you'd like with the clock. For instance, suppose it were 9 o'clock in the morning, just time to begin lessons. You'd only have to whisper a hint to time, and around go the clock in a twinkling. 1:30, time for dinner. I only wish it was, the March Hare said to himself in a whisper. That would be grand, certainly, Alice thought thoroughly. But then I shouldn't be hungry for it, you know. Not at first, perhaps, said the Hatter, but you could keep it to 1:30 as long as you like. Is that the way you manage? Alice asked. The Hatter shook his head mournfully. Not I, he replied. We quarreled last March, just before he went mad, you know, pointing with his teaspoon to the March Hare. It was the great concert given by the Queen of Hearts, and I had to sing, Tinkle, tinkle, little bat, how I wonder where you're at. Do you know that song, perhaps? I've heard something like it, said Alice. It goes on, you know, the Hatter continued, in this way. Up above the world you fly, like a tea-tray in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle. Here the Dormouse shook itself and began singing in its sleep. Twinkle, tinkle, tinkle, tinkle. Went on so long they had to pinch it to make it stop. Well, I'd hardly finished the first verse, said the Hatter, and the Queen jumped up and bawled out, He's murdering the time! Off with his head! How dreadfully savage! Exclaimed Alice. Ever since that, the Hatter went on in a mournful tone. He won't do a thing I ask. It's always 6 o'clock now. A bright idea came into Alice's head. Is that the reason so many tea things are put out here? She asked. Yes, that's it, said the Hatter with a sigh. It's always tea time, and we've no time to wash the things between whiles. Then you keep moving around, I suppose, said Alice. Exactly so, said the Hatter, as things get used up. But what happens when you've come to the beginning again? Alice ventured to ask. Suppose we change the subject. The March Hare interrupted, yawning. I'm getting tired of this. I've let the young lady tell us a story. I'm afraid I don't know one, said Alice, rather alarmed at the proposal. Then the Dormouse shall, they both cried. Wake up, Dormouse. And they pinched it on both sides at once. The Dormouse slowly opened its eyes. I wasn't asleep, he said in a hoarse, feeble voice. I heard every word you fellows were saying. Tell us a story, said the March Hare. Yes, please do, pleaded Alice. And be quick about it, added the Hatter, or you'll be asleep again before it's done. Once upon a time there were 3 little sisters, the Dormouse began in a great hurry, and their names were Elsie, Lacey, and Tilly. They lived at the bottom of a well. What did they live on? Said Alice, who always took great interest in questions of eating and drinking. They lived on a treacle, said the Mouse, after thinking a minute or two. They couldn't have done that, you know. Alice didn't really remarked. They'd have been ill. So they were, said the Dormouse. Very ill. Alice tried to fancy herself what such an extraordinary way of living would be like, but it puzzled her too much, so she went on. But why did they live at the bottom of the well? Take some more tea, the March Hare said to Alice, very earnestly. I've had nothing yet, Alice replied in an offended tone, so I can't take more. You mean you can't take less, said the Hatter. It's very easy to take more than nothing. No one asked your opinion, said Alice. Who's making personal remarks now? The Hatter asked triumphantly. Alice did not quite know what to say to this, so she helped herself to some tea and bread and butter, and then turned to the Dormouse and repeated her question. Why did they live at the bottom of a well? The Dormouse again took a minute or two to think about it, and then said, It was a treacle well. There's no such thing,
your promise. Treacle, said the Dormouse without considering it at all this time. I want a clean cup, interrupted the Hatter. Let's all move one place on. He moved as he spoke, and the Dormouse followed him. The March Hare moved into the Dormouse's place, and Alice rather unwillingly took the place of the March Hare. The Hatter was the only one who got any advantage from the change, and Alice was a good deal worse off than before, as the March Hare had just upset the milk jug onto his plate. Alice did not wish to offend the Dormouse again, so she began very cautiously. But I don't understand. Where did they draw the treacle from? You can draw water out of a water well, said the Hatter, so I could think you could draw treacle out of a treacle well. Stupid. But they were in the well, said Alice to the Dormouse, choosing not to notice the last remark. Of course they were, said the Dormouse. Well, in. This answer so confused poor Alice that she let the Dormouse go on for some time without interrupting it. They were learning to draw, the Dormouse went on, yawning and rubbing its eyes, for it was getting very sleepy. And they drew all manners of things. Everything that begins with an M. Why not an M, said Alice. Why not, said the March Hare. Alice was silent. The Dormouse had closed its eyes by this time, and was beginning to go off into a doze. On. Being pinched by the Hatter, it woke up again with a little shriek, and went on. That begins with an M. It's just mousetraps, the moon, memory, muchness. You know, they say things are much of a muchness. Did you ever see such a thing as a drawing of muchness? Really? Now you ask me, said Alice, very much confused. I don't think, then you shouldn't talk, said the Hatter. This piece of rudeness was more than Alice could bear. She got up in great disgust and walked off. The Dormouse fell asleep instantly, and neither of the others took notice of her going, though she looked back once or twice, half hoping they would call after her. The last time she saw them, they were trying to put the Dormouse into the teapot. At any rate, I'll never go there again, said Alice. She picked her way through the wood. It's the stupidest tea party I was at in all my life. Just as she said this, she noticed that one of the trees had a door leading right into it. That's very curious, she thought. But everything's curious today. I think I may well go in at once. And in she went. Once more she found herself in the long hall, and close to the little glass table. Now I'll manage better this time, she said to herself, and began by taking the little golden key and unlocking the door that led into the garden. Then she set to work nibbling at the mushroom. She kept a piece of it in her pocket, till she was down about a foot high, and she walked down the little passage, and then she found herself at last in the beautiful garden among the bright flower beds and the cool fountains. Chapter 8. A large rose tree stood near the entrance of the garden. The roses growing on it were white, but there were 3 gardeners at it, busily painting them red. Alice thought this was a very curious thing, and she went nearer to watch them. And just as she came up to them, she heard one of them say, "Look out now, 5, don't go splashing paint all over me like that." I couldn't help it, said 5 in a sulky tone. 7 jogged my elbow. On which 7 looked up and said, "That's right, 5. Always lay the blame on others." "You'd better not talk," said 5. "I heard the Queen say only yesterday you deserved to be beheaded." "What for?" said the one who had just spoken. "That's none of your business, too," said 7. "Yes, it is his business," said 5, "and I'll tell him. It was for bringing the cooked tulip roots instead of onions." 7 flung down his brush and had just begun. Well, of all the unjust things! When his eye chanced to fall upon Alice, as she stood watching them, he checked himself suddenly. The others looked around, and all of them bowed low. "Would you tell me," said Alice, a little timidly, "why you are painting those roses?" 5 and 7 said nothing, but looked at 2. 2 began in a low voice. "Why, the fact is, you see, miss, this here ought to have been a red rose tree, and we put a white one in by mistake, and if the Queen was to find out, we should all have our heads cut off, you know. So, see, miss, we're doing our best afore she comes to—" At this moment, 5, who had been anxiously looking across the garden, called out, "The Queen! The Queen!" and the 3 gardeners instantly flew themselves flat on their faces. There was a sound of many footsteps, and Alice looked round, eager to see the Queen. First came 10 soldiers carrying clubs. These were all shaped like the 3 gardeners, oblong and flat, with their hands and feet at the corners. Next, the 10 couriers. These were ornamented all over with diamonds, and walked 2 and 2, as the soldiers did. After these came the royal children. There were 10 of them, and the royal dears came gardeners, but she could not remember ever having heard of such a rule at processions. And besides, what would be the use of a procession, thought she, if people had to lie down upon their faces so that they couldn't see it? So she stood still where she was and waited. When the procession came opposite to Alice, they stopped and looked at her, and the queen said severely, "Who is this?" She said it only to the Knave of Hearts, who bowed and smiled in reply. "Idiot," said the queen, tossing her head impatiently, and turning to Alice, she went on, "What is your name, child?" "My name is Alice." "So please, your majesty," said Alice very politely, but she added to herself, "Why, they're only a pack of cards after all. I needn't be afraid of them." "And who are these?" said the queen, pointing to the 3 gardeners who were lying round the rose tree, for, you see, they were lying on their faces, and the patterns on their backs was not the same as the rest of the pack, so she could not tell whether they were gardeners, soldiers, or courtiers, or 3 of her own children. "How should I know?" said Alice, surprised at her own courage. "It's no business of mine." The queen turned crimson with fury, and after glaring at her for a moment like a wild beast, screamed, "Off with her head! Off with—" "Nonsense," said Alice very loudly and decidedly, and the queen was silent. The king had laid his hand on her arm and timidly said, "Consider, my dear, she is only a child." The queen turned angrily away from him and said to the knave, "Turn them over." And the knave did so, very carefully, with one foot. "Get up," said the queen, in a shrill, loud voice, and the 3 gardeners instantly jumped up and began bowing to the king, the queen, the royal children, and everybody else. "Leave off that," screamed the queen. "You make me giddy." And then, turning to the rose tree, she went on, "What have you been doing here?" "May it please your majesty," said two in a very humble tone, going down on one knee, "we were trying—" The next page is showing the Cheshire Cat and the Duchess and Alice dodging the different pots and pans that are being flung at them. The next page is showing Alice carrying the baby pig, and she's looking into its eyes and realizing it is indeed a pig. The next photo is of Alice sitting at the tea party. The Mad Hatter and the Hare are talking to each other while Alice just looks a little annoyed. I find it interesting that in the illustrations, the hare has human hands, but a hare's body. Very interesting. And of course, the last illustration is the queen asking what the bowing cards painting the rosebush red are doing. Continue. "I see," said the queen, who had meanwhile been examining the roses. "Off with their heads." And the procession moved on, 3 of the soldiers remaining behind to execute the unfortunate gardeners, who ran to Alice for protection. "You shan't be beheaded," said Alice. She put them into a large flower pot that stood near. The 3 soldiers wandered around for a minute or 2, looking for them, and quietly marched off after the others. "Are their heads off?" shouted the queen. "Their heads are gone, if it please your majesty," the soldier shouted in reply. "That's right," shouted the queen. "Can you play croquet?" The soldiers were silent and looked at Alice, as the question was evidently meant for her. "Yes," shouted Alice. "Come on, then," roared the queen, and Alice joined the procession, wondering very much what would happen next. It's a very fine day," said a timid voice at her side. She was walking by the white rabbit, who was peeping anxiously into her face. "Very," said Alice. "Where's the Duchess?" "Hush, hush," said the rabbit in a low, hurried tone. He looked anxiously over his shoulder as he spoke, then
themselves up and stand upon their hands and feet to make the arches. The chief difficulty Alice found at first was managing her flamingo. She succeeded in getting its body tucked away, comfortably enough under her arm, with its legs hanging down, but generally she had got its neck nicely straightened out and was going to give the hedgehog a little blow with its head. It would twist itself around and look up at her face with such a puzzled expression that she could not help bursting out laughing. And when she had gotten its head down and was going to begin again, it was very provoking to find that the hedgehog had unrolled itself and was in the act of crawling away. Besides all this, there was generally a ridge or furrow in the way whenever she wanted to send the hedgehog to, and as the double-up soldiers were always getting up and walking off in other parts of the ground, Alice soon came to the conclusion that it was a very difficult game indeed. The players all played at once without waiting for turns, quarreling all the while and fighting for the hedgehogs. In a very short time, the queen was in a furious passion, went on stamping about and shouting, "Off with his head, off with her head," about once in a minute. Alice began to feel very uneasy. To be sure, she had not yet had any dispute with the queen, but she knew that it might happen any minute. And then, thought she, what would become of me? They're dreadfully fond of beheading people here. The great wonder is that there's anyone left alive. She was looking about for some way of escape, and wondering whether she could get away without being seen, when she noticed a curious appearance in the air. It puzzled her very much at first, but after watching it for a minute or two, she made it out to be a grin, and she said to herself, "It's the Cheshire Cat. I shall have somebody to talk to." "How are you getting on?" said the cat, as soon as there was a mouth enough for it to speak with. Alice waited till the eyes appeared, and then nodded. It's no use speaking to it till its ears have come, or at least one of them. In another minute, the whole head appeared. Alice put down her flamingo and began an account of the game, feeling very glad she had someone to listen to her. The cat seemed to think that was more than enough of it now in sight, and no more of it had appeared. "I don't think they play fairly at all," Alice began in a rather complaining tone, "and they all quarreled so dreadfully one can't hear oneself speak. And they don't seem to have any rules in particular. At least if there are, nobody attends to them, and you've no idea how confusing it is, all the things being alive. For instance, there's the arch I've got to go through next, walking about the other end of the ground, and I should just have croqueted the queen's hedgehog just now, only it ran away when it saw mine coming." "How do you like the queen?" said the cat in a low voice. "Not at all," said Alice. "She's so extremely—" Just then she noticed that the queen was close behind her, listening, so she went on, "Likely to win, that it's hardly worthwhile finishing the game." The queen smiled and passed on. "Who are you talking to?" said the king, coming up to Alice and looking at the cat's head with a great curiosity. "It's a friend of mine, a Cheshire Cat," said Alice. "Allow me to introduce it." "I don't like the look of it at all. However, it may kiss my hand if it likes." "I'd rather not," the cat remarked. "Don't be impertinent," said the king, "and don't look at me like that." He got behind Alice as he spoke. "A cat may look at a king," said Alice. "I've read that in a book, but I don't remember where." "Well, it must be removed," said the king, very decidedly, and he called to the queen, who was passing at the moment. "My dear, I wish you would have this cat removed." The queen had only one way of settling all difficulties, great or small. "Off with its head," she said, without even looking round. "I'll fetch the executioner myself," said the king, and he hurried off. Alice thought she might as well go back and see how the game was going on, as she heard the queen's voice in the distance, screaming with passion. She had already heard her sentence 3 of the players to be executed for having missed their turns. looked so grave and anxious. The queen could think of nothing else to say, but it belongs to the Duchess. You better ask her about it. She's in prison, the queen said to the executioner. Fetch her here, and the executioner went off like an arrow. The cat's head began fading away the moment he was gone, and by the time he had come back with the Duchess, it had entirely disappeared. So the king and the executioner ran wildly up and down looking for it, while the rest of the party went back to the game.
they saw her, they hurried back to the game, the queen merely remarking that a moment's delay would cost them their lives. All the time they were playing, the queen never left off quarreling with the other players and shouting, "Off with his head," or "Off with her head," to whom she sentenced were taken into custody by the soldiers, who of course had to leave off being arches to do this, so that by the end half an hour or so there were no arches left, and all the players except the king, queen, and Alice were in custody and under sentence of execution. Then the queen left off, quite out of breath, and said to Alice, "Have you seen the mock turtle yet?" "No," said Alice. "I don't even know what a mock turtle is." "It's the thing mock turtle soup is made from," said the queen. "I never saw one, or heard of one," said Alice. "Come on then," said the queen, "and he shall tell you his story." As they walked off together, Alice heard the king say in a low voice to the company generally, "You are all pardoned." "Come, that's a good thing," she said to herself, for she felt quite unhappy at the number of executions the queen had ordered. They very soon came upon a griffin, lying fast asleep in the sun. If you don't know what a griffin is, look at the picture. "Up, lazy thing," said the queen, "and take this young lady to see the mock turtle, and to hear his story. I must go back to see some executions I have ordered." On this page there's art of the griffin lazing under the tree. He's got his claws on his belly and his back is pressed against the tree. He's kind of sleeping like a human would. I always thought they'd sleep like cats. And the queen walked off, leaving Alice alone with the griffin. Alice did not like the look of the creature, but on the whole she thought it would be quite safe to stay with it, as to go after the savage queen, so she waited. The griffin sat up and rubbed its eyes, then watched the queen till she was out of sight. Then it chuckled. "What fun," said the griffin, half to itself, half to Alice. "What is the fun?" said Alice. "Why, she," said the griffin. "All her fancy, that they never execute nobody, you know. Come on." "Everybody says come on here," said Alice. Thought Alice, as she went slowly after it. "I never was so ordered about in my life, never." They had not gone far before they saw the mock turtle in the distance, sitting sad and lonely on the little ledge of a rock. As they came nearer, Alice could hear him sighing as if his heart would break. She pitied him deeply. "What is his sorrow?" she asked the griffin, and the griffin answered, very nearly the same words as before. "It's all his fancy, that. He hasn't got no sorrow, you know. Come on." And so they went up to the mock turtle, who looked at them with large eyes full of tears, but said nothing. "This here young lady," said the griffin, "she wants to know your story, she do." "I'll tell it to her," said the mock turtle in a deep, hollow tone. "Sit down, both of you, and don't speak a word till I've finished." So they sat down, and nobody spoke for some minutes. Alice thought to herself, "I don't see how he can ever finish if he doesn't begin," but she waited patiently. "Once," said the mock turtle at last, with a deep sigh, "I was a real turtle." These words were followed by a very long silence,
sobs choked out his voice. "Same as if he had a bone in his throat," said the Griffin, and set to work shaking him and punching him in the back. At last the Mock Turtle recovered his voice, and with tears running down his cheeks, he went on again. "You may not have lived much under the sea." "I haven't," said Alice. "And perhaps you were never introduced to a lobster." Alice began to say, "I once tasted," but checked herself so hastily and said, "No, never." "So you can have no idea what a
always obey, though she felt it would come along all wrong, and she went on in a trembling voice. I passed by his gardens, and marked with one eye how an owl and the panther were sharing a pie. The panther took pie crust and gravy and meat, while the owl had the dish and its share of the treat. When the pie was all finished, the owl was kindly permitted to pocket the spoon, while the panther received a knife and a fork with a growl and concluded the banquet by, "What is the use of repeating all that stuff?" the Mock Turtle interrupted. "If you don't explain it as you go on, it's by far the most confusing thing I ever heard." "Yes, I think you'd better leave off," said the jurymen are back in their proper places. All, he repeated with great emphasis, looking hard at Alice as she did so. Alice looked up at the jury box and saw that, in her haste, she put the lizard in head downwards, and the poor little thing was waving its tail about in a melancholy way, being quite unable to move. She soon got it out again and put it right. Not that it signifies much, she said to herself. I should think it would be quite as much use in the trial one way up as the other. As soon as the jury had a little recovered from the shock of being upset, and their slates and pencils had been found and handed back to them, they set to work very diligently to write out a history of the accident, except for the lizard, who seemed much too overcome to do anything but sit with his mouth open, gazing at the roof of the court. What do you know about this business? The king said to Alice. Nothing, said Alice. Nothing whatever, persisted the king. Nothing whatever, said Alice. That's very important, the king said, turning to the jury. They were just beginning to write this down upon their slates when the White Rabbit interrupted. Unimportant, your majesty, means, of course, he said in a very respectful tone, but frowning and making faces at him as he spoke. Unimportant, of course, I meant, the king hastily said, and went on himself in an undertone. Important, unimportant, important, unimportant, important, unimportant. As if he were trying which word sounded best. Some of the jury wrote down important and some unimportant. Alice could see this, as she was near enough to look over their slates. But it doesn't matter a bit, she thought to herself. At this moment, the king, who had been for some time busily writing in his notebook, called out, "Silence!" and read out from his book, Rule 42, all persons more than a mile high must leave the court. Everybody looked at Alice. I'm not a mile high, said Alice. You are, said the king. Nearly 2 miles high, added the queen. Well, I shan't go at any rate, said Alice. Besides, that's not a regular rule. You invented it just now. It's the oldest rule in the book, said the king. Then it ought to be number 1, said Alice. The king turned pale and shut his notebook hastily. Consider your verdict, he said to the jury in a low, trembling voice. There's more evidence to come yet, please, your majesty, said the White Rabbit, jumping up in a great hurry. This paper has just been picked up. What's in it, said the queen. I haven't opened it yet, said the White Rabbit, but it seems to be a letter, written by the prisoner to somebody. It must have been that, said the king, unless it was written to nobody, which isn't usual, you know. Who is it directed to, said one of the jurymen. It isn't directed at all, said the White Rabbit. In fact, there's nothing written on the outside. He unfolded the paper as he spoke and added, It isn't a letter after all, it's a set of verses. Are they in the prisoner's handwriting? Asked another of the jurymen. No, they're not, said the White Rabbit. And that's the queerest thing about it. The jury all looked puzzled. He must have imitated somebody else's hand, said the king. The jury all brightened up again. Please, your majesty, said the knave. I didn't write it, and they can't prove that I did. There's no name signed at the end. If you didn't sign it, said the king, that only makes the matter worse. You must have meant some mischief, or else you'd have signed your name like an honest man. There was a general clapping of hands at this. It was the first really clever thing the king had said that day. That proves his guilt, of course, said the queen. So off with. It doesn't prove anything of the sort, said Alice. Why, you don't even know what they're about. Read them, said the king. The White Rabbit put on his spectacles. Where shall I begin, please, your majesty? He asked. Begin at the beginning, the king said gravely, and go on till you come to the end, then stop. There was dead silence in the court, whilst the rabbit read out these verses. They told me you had been to her, and mentioned me to him. She gave me a good character, but said I could not swim. He sent them word I had not gone. We know it to be true. If she should push the matter on, what will become of you? I gave her 1, they gave him 2. You gave us 3 or more. They all returned from him to you, though they were mine before. If I or she should chance to be involved in this affair, he trusts you to set them free, exactly as you were. My notion was that you had been, before she had this fit, an obstacle that came between him, ourselves, and it. Don't let him know she liked them best, for this must ever be a secret kept from all the rest between yourself and me. That's the most important piece of evidence we've heard yet, said the king, rubbing his hands. So now let the jury, if any of them can
she should push the matter on. That must be the queen. What would become of you? What indeed? I gave her one, they gave him two. Why, that must be what he did with the tarts, you know. But it goes on from, they all returned from him to you, said Alice. Why, there they are, said the king triumphantly, pointing to the tarts on the table. Nothing can be clearer than that. Then again, before she had this fit, you never had any fits, my dear, I think, he said to the queen. Never, said the queen furiously, throwing an inkstand at the lizard as she spoke. The unfortunate little Bill had left off writing on a slate with one finger, as he found it made no mark, but now it hastily began again using the ink that was trickling down his face, as long as it lasted. Then the words don't fit you, said the king, looking around the court with a smile. It was dead silence. It's a pun, said the king, added in an angry tone, and everybody laughed. Let the jury consider their verdict, the king said, for about the 20th time that day. No, no, said the queen, sentence first, verdict after. Stuff and nonsense, said Alice loudly. The idea of having a sentence first. Hold your tongue, said the queen, turning purple. I won't, said Alice. Off with her head, the queen shouted at the top of her voice. Nobody moved. Who cares for you, said Alice. She had grown to her full size by this time. You're nothing but a pack of cards. At this, the whole pack rose up into the air and came flying down to her. She gave a little scream, half of fright, half of anger, and tried to beat them off, and had found herself lying on the bank, with her head in her lap of her sister, who was gently brushing away some of the dead leaves that had fluttered down from the tree upon her face. Wake up, Alice dear, said her sister. Why, what a long sleep you've had. Oh, I've had such a curious dream, said Alice, and she told her sister, as well as she could remember them, all these strange adventures of her that you have just been reading about. And when she had finished, her sister kissed her and said, It was a curious dream, dear, certainly. But now, run in to your tea. It's getting late. So Alice got up and ran off, thinking while she ran, as well as she might, what a wonderful dream it had been. But her sister sat still as she had left her, leaning her head, watching the setting sun, thinking of little Alice and her wonderful adventures, till she too began dreaming after fashion, and this was her dream. First, she dreamed of little Alice herself, and once again the tiny hands were clasped on her knee, and the bright, eager eyes were looking up into hers. She could hear the very tones of her voice, and see that queer little toss of her head to keep back the wandering hair that would always get into her eyes. And still she listened, or seemed to listen. The whole place around her became alive with the strange creatures of her sister's dream. The long grass rustled by her feet as the white rabbit hurried by. The frightened mouse splashed his way through the neighboring pool. She could hear the rattle of teacups as the March Hare and his friends shared never-ending meal, and the shrill voice of the queen ordering off her unfortunate guests to execution. Once more the big baby was sneezing on the Duchess's knee, while plates and dishes crashed round it. Once more the shriek of the griffin and the squeaking of the lizard's slate pencil, and the choking of the suppressed guinea pigs filled the air, mixed with the distant sobs of the miserable mock turtle. So she sat, with closed eyes, and half believed herself in Wonderland, though she knew she had to open them again, and would all change to a dull reality. The grass would only be rustling in the wind, and the pool rippling to the waving of the reeds. The rattling teacups would change to the tinkling of sheep bells, and the queen's shrill cries to the voice of the shepherd boy, and the sneeze of the baby, the shriek of the griffin, and all the other queer noises would change, she knew, to the confused clamor of the busy farmyard, while the lowing of the cattle in the distance would take the place of the mock turtle's heavy sobs. Lastly, she pictured to herself how the same little sister of hers would, after time, be herself a grown woman, and how she would keep, through all her riper years, the simple and loving heart of childhood. And how she would gather about her other little children, and make their eyes bright and eager with many a strange tale, perhaps even with the dream of Wonderland of long ago, and how she would feel with all their simple sorrows, and find a pleasure in all their simple joys, remembering her own child life and the happy summer days. The end. It seems like you dozed off there a little bit. Did you enjoy the story? It's one of my